I'm very happy to see you all. Many of you I know, all the ones I don't know, I'm still even more happy to see you. It's the fourth of a series of 5 conversations that we have as EFA, European Festivals Association, between festivals and cities. Why? Probably for very obvious reasons, because we believe in the importance of local decision makers on the one hand, and we believe in the power and the contribution of arts and local level and towards communities on the other. And we also believe that there is a need for both festivals and for cities to connect better around certain topics discussed until now in 3 meetings so far. I'm very happy in this meeting to speak about the contribution of festivals and cities towards the well-being and inclusion in cities. And I'm very happy to do that in co-production with Eurocities, the network of major European cities. And in this framework, I'd like to give you, Julie, I don't see you exactly. Oh, I see you next to me. Here you are. I would like to give you the floor before passing on to our moderator, Cristina. Julie.
Good morning. So I'm Julie Hervé, based at Eurocities, the European network of large cities. We're here in Brussels. Thank you, Kathrin, for inviting us to join and co-host this nice discussion. Culture, health, and well-being is really at the center of the agenda of our work at the moment. We will have a specific conference with our members this autumn in Finland, in Tampere. And we look forward to having this first discussion with you and then maybe to continue the cooperation. Eurocities is the European network of large cities. We group together 180 local governments, and culture is just one of the areas of the work we're doing. We help cities learn from each other and also hopefully lobby a little bit the European institutions for more funding for local creative projects. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you very much. So it makes all sense for us as EFA and Eurocities to join forces for this topic. And without any further delay, I'm passing on to Cristina to introduce our fantastic panelists that we have today. I'm so happy about your contributions, Pier, Luigi, Bart, and Rarita. Cristina is our moderator as in the last sessions. Thank you, Cristina, for taking the time in between all the different other obligations that you have. Amongst the others, she's also in the jury to appoint Europe's capitals of culture, the process that even with Corona is going on. Cristina, please take the floor for the next 50 minutes, 55 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathrin. Hello to all. It's great to be among festivals and cities again. And I thank EFA, the European Festival Association, and also Eurocities for these conversations. My role today here is to introduce and to address the speakers. As you said, Kathrin, we have a very interesting set of speakers today. Just to set the overall picture first, we will start with what we can say a keynote speak in times of Zoom. So a short one, 10 minutes, with Luigi Sacco. Then if there are specific questions addressed directly to Luigi, we will have also a Q&A session. And then we will move on to 2 other speakers that I will introduce afterwards. And at the end, we will all convene in a joint debate. So please feel free to participate. Use the chat function for that, and then we can also give you the floor directly, but please address us first on chat to ask for the floor. I will start up and move on immediately to Luigi Sacco. You are, Luigi, you are an expert in economy of culture, CCIs, culture heritage, but you have also been dedicating your academic time, your research time towards precisely this issue that is under discussion today. You have studied the interactions between culture, health, and psychological well-being, and trying to measure the impact of culture. So this is an old battle of yours, I would say, but also of the whole sector. I had the pleasure to hear you live on this issue already, so I will pass on the floor to you now and ask you if you think also in these pandemic times we finally have an entry door to be convincing, be taken serious in this issue. Pierluigi, please, you have 10 minutes.
Sure. Thank you very much, Cristina. No, I think that this issue is really worthwhile, not only for the pandemic crisis, but because we are really at a turning point from this point of view, because even major international institutions like the World Health Organization is now explicitly recognizing the role of culture as a major transformational force. And in particular, there has been a scoping review being published in December 2019 that reviewed systematically the state of the art in the field. And this really gave a clear signal that the possibility of having cultural participation and experiences as a potential future branch of complementary medicine is not no longer a utopia or a fantasy. One could think that in the end, thinking of this relationship could also be, let's say, threatening from the point of view of the meaning of what we are doing as cultural players, because after all, one could say, okay, but culture is about culture. If we are now connecting culture to well-being and health in this way, isn't this a way to instrumentalize what culture is, and in some sense to make culture no longer something that is meaningful in itself, but only insofar as it, for example, improves, let's say, the psychological health of people? But this would mean that maybe at this point, cultural players are not really working on the quality of what they are doing from the cultural point of view, but just to have some sort of effects. So it's important to discuss this objection, because of course it's not a futile objection at all. I personally think that the best way to frame this is that in a situation like the one that we're living in, not only in terms of social and health challenges, but think, for example, of climate change, think of inequality. I think that for many cultural players of the new generations, creating something that has a social impact is not, let's say, a pragmatic necessity. It's a poetic necessity. So people are really starting to think of new ways of producing culture to address societal challenges as a real contribution that culture can give to this specific global endeavor. And in some sense, the very notion of what is today the aesthetic relevance of work sometimes has more to do with the capacity to significantly connect to certain constituencies than just to command, let's say, the approval of a relatively small number of gatekeepers. So this means that working in this perspective, having, let's say, health as a poetical necessity and no longer as an impact indicator, really changes completely the way in which we can work on this. And by the way, of course, changes completely also the perception that society and the public opinion can have of artistic and cultural practices, because of course, we all also have to remember that for many people still, culture is already seen as a, let's say, sign of social distinction. For many people still, culture is something that marks, let's say, separations in social status between people who are, let's say, proficient enough to benefit from cultural opportunities and people who are not. These are clearly challenges that we have to tackle. And there is a few other fields in which this can be taken, this can be carried out systematically, as in culture and health and well-being. So the scientific basis that we have today is absolutely bewildering, not only in terms of volume, but in terms of dynamics and in terms of how more and more institutions and research networks are today devoting to this particular topic. So the real challenge as I see it today is, however, not to consider the cultural world as passive receivers of scientific wisdom on the topic, but it's very much about creating new collaborations. Just to give you an example, clearly, to have clinical relevance, we need scientifically rigorous measurements. But what can you do in this particular sense? Can you imagine, for example, very abstract laboratory settings like the ones in which you test, let's say, psychological effects to test the well-being impact of culture? I don't think that this is a way, because these kind of settings are so unnatural that inevitably people behave in a different way. So we need a new collaboration between artists and scientists and cultural professionals and scientists, also to imagine new protocols, new frameworks in which we can preserve the significance of the cultural experience, but also at the same time to make it amenable to forms of measurement that can be, let's say, transmissible and validated also by the scientific community. By the way, when I see measurement, I'm not simply saying that we have to mechanically translate what we do into a small bunch of numbers. What I'm saying is that measurement is a way for us to understand what's going on with our own projects. Because, for example, if you have, let's say, a project of intercultural dialogue with people from migrant communities and people from a resident community, and if you really understand that in a clear sense, this kind of project change the empathic attitudes of these people on a scale that you can understand. This is not only meaningful for the policymaker or for the scientist, this is meaningful for the artist. Because of course, I mean, otherwise what can you do? You see people smiling and you decide that the project went well or whatever. I mean, we really need to learn. And there are very few ways in which we can do it in a really insightful way than by considering specific tools that have been designed exactly for this, improving our knowledge and creating also a cycle of ideation and implementation of artistic projects in which we can learn from previous experience in real accountable ways. And of course, by becoming more accountable, we can also become more credible in terms of asking for more resources. But this is more a consequence rather than the cause of why we need more measurement in the field. And especially, and then I'm going to conclude, as it was correctly pointed out by Cristina, clearly we are now in a post-pandemic scenario in which huge resources will be devoted to rebooting societies, rebooting economies, and the place that culture will actually play in this particular new growth cycle will depend to a large extent to our capacity to be accountable, to be willing to create new ways of collaboration and integration with other parts of the civil society, and also in some sense to be ourselves willing to step out of our comfort zone, because we are inviting all our audiences all the time to step out of their comfort zone. But what about us? It's clearly, in this sense, it's a two-sided dialogue that means that in this particular sense, we need a real, let's say, experimental attitude in this respect. Clearly, there are risks, of course, like in all experimentation. But again, we invite people to take risks when we invite them into our own spaces and our own experiences. So I think that this is a wonderful opportunity. And I think that, by the way, and this is just my last thought, if we really consider the scale at which we could make a difference in this particular regard, and I just consider one case, active aging, the tragedy of the elderly in an aging society that sometimes are also cured very well, but abandoned to an experiential wilderness, completely on their own, often socially disconnected, often depressed, even when they are receiving very good standards of care from the medical or social point of view. We can make a huge difference by improving the quality of these people, bringing them back into the civil society, bringing them back as individuals and parts of a community for real. This alone, I think, would justify any kind of proactive and rigorous way of trying to make a difference in culture and health, and also a very, let's say, poetically beautiful way of doing it.
Thank you, Pierluigi. The floor is now open if you have questions directly to Pierluigi. Otherwise, we can also count on him for the final debate. As we are among festivals and cities, Pierluigi, I would ask you, what role do you see now then for cities or for festivals, or for city policymakers or for festival directors in this agenda? What advice we would give to them? How can they contribute as well?
Clearly, festivals are the most challenged by the post-pandemic scenario for reasons so obvious that I don't need to elaborate on them. But this is, again, a very interesting way to, let's say, to try and innovate in this particular regard. I don't see, let's say, the digital sphere as an enemy from this point of view. I think it's a huge opportunity to move towards a tendency that is already in place, which is that of hybrid knowledge spaces. So, for example, even if some festivals are today at risk of not being able to happen for, let's say, 1 or even 2 years, who knows? I mean, the scenarios are so uncertain. This is an exceptional opportunity to try and develop digital skills, and in particular digital formats, to involve people into something that, by the way, was already a critical aspect for festivals. Festivals happen during one specific time of the year, but more and more it's clear that the festivals that really work should be, let's say, happening throughout the year in terms of keeping on engaging people, in keeping on developing issues, possibilities, provocations, and so on and so forth. So from this point of view, it's extremely important to consider this as a vital source of innovation. And what is true for festivals, of course, is true for cities on a bigger scale. And somebody was asking, what are hybrid knowledge spaces? These are spaces in which you have, of course, a possibility to get knowledge and experience from direct interaction, but also from digital interaction, and in some sense, the interaction of the two layers is what creates the hybrid space. For example, the fact that we are deploying today a new generation of augmented reality techniques that enable you, while you are experiencing something, to access also relevant information, relevant connections, relevant interaction that enrich the physical experience that you are doing. And on the other way, of course, when you are digitally engaged in a certain place, the fact that you are also connected, let's say, emotionally to the physical place creates motivation for you to attend or to move to the physical space for the kind of things you cannot achieve in the digital sphere. So it's extremely important to consider this integration of the two dimensions as probably one of the most important innovation frontiers for the cultural sectors. And festivals in particular are probably the forefront of experimentation in this particular regard. One could say, but this is very costly and festivals are already under financial pressure. This is true, but on the other hand, the next wave of European programming, both in the Creative Europe, but especially in the Horizon Europe strands, is basically providing lots of opportunity from this point of view. So we need to get prepared. At the same time, it's also very important that cities, and especially heritage cities, devote some resources to this kind of experimentation, because today it's really a matter of their future sustainability. It's clearly, and fortunately, the over-tourism models of, let's say, cultural tourism are probably seeing the end of this cycle, of their cycle, fortunately. But what's the alternative? How do you build the alternative? You also have to create space for experimentation. And so it's also very important that local administrations are today willing to experiment with this, devote some resources with this, and try to, again, let's say, carve a new strategic space. Also because Europe in this particular regard is probably the most, let's say, appropriate context to experiment with this for many different reasons that we don't have the time to discuss there at length. But I really see this as a golden opportunity for Europe, because we are prepared for this. If we are politically aware of the potential of this, we are prepared. We have the skills, we have the technology, and we have the experience. So why not?
Right. Thank you. And also thank you for already taking the question from the chat, Pier Luigi. I would say that now that you referred cities, we can move on to our next speakers, because precisely they will bring out two examples. Our next speaker will be Bart Doucet. He's an advisor for the culture department of the city of Ghent in Belgium. Please, Bart, the floor is yours. Our city, like Ghent, is taking up these challenges and addressing well-being via culture. Being surely well-being, probably the ultimate goal and mission of city councils nowadays.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank also EFA and Eurocities for the invitation. I'm very happy that I can represent my city, Ghent, in this forum. And just to, for those who don't know Ghent, Ghent is the second largest city in Flanders with about 260,000 residents. And we have a very long-standing tradition of festivals in our city, festivals in very many disciplines. And we have a lot of festivals, but one discipline of festivals in particular is well represented in Ghent, and that is festivals on music. And that is also why in 2009 UNESCO awarded the title of UNESCO Creative City of Music. One of the reasons why we got this title was that we have so many festivals on music. A special case in the festivals that we have in Ghent is what we call the Gentse Feesten in Dutch, our Ghent festival, that should take place within 2 weeks now, but of course it is cancelled in this present situation. The Gentse Feest is a 10 days festival in July that occupies the complete city center, and that uses all possible outdoor spaces, but also a lot of indoor venues, and indoor venues are the biggest infrastructures like the Opera House, the Municipal Theatre, but also cafes, little venues that are run privately, etc., etc. And the whole thing is that the whole city is occupied by the Ghent Festival, and it's about music, it's about theatre, it's about street art. Whatever discipline you can imagine is represented, I think, in the Gentse Feest. And we attract with this festival that already exists since the 19th century. We attract about 100,000 visitors every day. And within this Gentse Feest context, you have some dedicated and very focused festivals. Like the Puppet Busker Festival on puppetry, Pole Pole, which is going on, world music. We have Miramiro, which is dealing with circus, Boomtown, dealing with pop and rock, things like that. But just before the Gentse Feest, we have another festival that is also cancelled at this very moment. That is our Ghent Jazz Festival. They have that is an open air festival on the Bijlokensit in Ghent. It's cancelled now, but they developed they developed an alternative. They are going to organize the Ghent Jazz 1.5, and 1.5 is referring to the 1.5 meters of social distancing that we have to keep, of course. So we have our Ghent Jazz, we have our Gentse Feest, and by then we are in August, and then we all desperately need a rest in Ghent, because we've been feasting for a whole month. And after that we start the cultural season again with a very with an open air initiative which is called Eau de Ghent. Eau de Ghent is the appetizer during one day for the Festival of the Flanders, the big music festival that we have in September. And Eau de Ghent is also occupying the whole city center with small concerts and theater performances and street art performances. As I said, it is an appetizer to the Festival of the Flanders, and the name refers to Eau de Ghent. It's Ghent, the French name for Ghent, eau for water, because we have a lot of canals and rivers in our city that are being used at that moment to go for transporting audiences from one side to another. So that is Eau de Ghent, and then in September we have the Festival of the Flanders, I think one of the oldest music festivals in Europe, founded in 1958, by the father of your present EFA chairman, Jan Briers. It is one of the festivals that also is it is a festival that used for the first time historical venues like the cathedral, like the medieval Bijloken hospital ward, to give concerts and to make people discover these venues, these historical venues. And it is also this use of these historical venues is one of the reasons also for our UNESCO title of Creative City of Music. And then in October, we have our Film Fest, our International Film Festival in Ghent. And that is also a festival that focuses on music, because since a long time, since the beginning, the Film Fest focuses on the impact of music on film. And the Film Fest is also the founder of the World Soundtrack Awards that are taking place in Ghent. So we really are a festival city. And now we have two festivals that have been cancelled, the Ghent Feest and Ghent Jazz. As I said, Ghent Jazz is developing an alternative, the Ghent Jazz 1.5. On the Bijlokenzitten, where they usually have their festival, and it is combined on the Bijlokenzitten with Bijloko Wonderland also, which is an initiative of the municipal concert hall, one of the music companies that is located on the Bijlokenzitten. Our city museum is in the initiative, is an art center for that, and also a bookshop. They are organizing this Bijloko Wonderland next to the Ghent Jazz on this Bijlokenzitten. And I think that's it's good that they do it, because it's an alternative for everything that is being cancelled by now, and it's a need that they fill in for people to meet and to enjoy culture, because the digital culture might be very high on the agenda in this very moment, but I think it cannot replace the live experience of attending a music a concert and sharing it with people on the spot, the open air, or in a concert hall. That is about, well, the last thing that I would like to mention also is an initiative, a recent initiative of the city of Ghent, of the municipality, and that is that 9 squares in the public realm in Ghent, 9 squares in the city center and in neighborhoods of the city are going to be given back, so to speak, to the residents and to the cultural players around the squares or in the neighborhood, that they are allowed to create initiatives, cultural initiatives or other initiatives that they would like to organize on these squares. The idea behind this is that people, after our lockdown and after being at home for so long, need some space and some room to breathe and to do things together with maybe with neighbors also, because that is one of the things that we saw in this the lockdown that we went through, that a lot of neighborhood initiatives were popping up, and that a lot of these were related to culture, with little concerts or other things that were happening. So I think this is a bit general overview of what we do when it comes to the subventions or the support from the city council. We decided not to cut into subsidies or subventions. What is more, we even invest more in culture to also tackle the problems that our cultural players have. But one of the things that is very what gives us a warm feeling also is, like in the Bijloko concert hall, that is that 1/3 of the audience isn't asking for a refund of their tickets, but they donate their tickets to the concert hall. So they are very involved in what culture means and is in our city, I think. So this is first general overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart, for bringing us the example of Ghent. Now we are moving on to Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Our next speaker is Rarita Zbranca. Rarita, it's a pleasure to see you again. You have been a cultural activist and also a member of the Soul for Europe for long. And then lately you are a part of the Cluj Cultural Center, that is an NGO that seeks to promote cultural and urban development. and which is a very interesting legacy of the city's Cluj bid towards the European capital of culture. I know that you are in this capacity. You are leader of a Creative Europe program that precisely started already in 2019, and it dedicates to arts and well-being. So please, Rarita, the floor is yours. Tell us about it. I hope you are there somewhere. Yes,
yes, I'm here. Nice to see you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation for this discussion on a subject that is very dear to us. Cluj, for those of you that don't know where it is in the northwest of Romania, in Transylvania. Is a middle-sized city, around 400,000 inhabitants. And the Cluj Cultural Center, as Cristina already mentioned, is an organization that brings together more than 100 local organizations, including the local authorities, but also cultural organizations, universities, business clusters, to work together for using culture for social transformation and urban development here in Cluj. And our interest in well-being started with the fact that the city of Cluj has in its strategy as a key concept the quality of life. But the quality of life, in the previous strategy at least, has been looking mainly at indicators that deal with prosperity, with material prosperity, with, you know, access of people to infrastructure, but not so much yet looking on how people feel. So this is something that we felt that from the cultural side, we can definitely bring into the discussion. So let's say our aim is to bring this added value to the next strategy that is being now designed for the city, and this quality of well-being, and in make visible the importance of culture for bringing well-being to the citizens of Cluj. So if you allow me, I will share a screen, but if that's possible, if I don't know who's able to give me that permission.
I suppose yes.
It's coming.
It's coming, okay. Just to make it easier to focus, hopefully. Okay. Is this visible now?
Yes.
Okay. So Innerspace is the project that we have within the Cluj Cultural Center to explore the relation between culture and well-being. And some of the actions that we do in this respect are that we have set the basis of a culture and well-being think tank, meaning a group of people across Europe that are experts in culture, health, psychology, that share experiences and try to figure out a roadmap for this type of exploration. We're also engaging in conversations. We organize an annual forum on this topic, and we engage in artistic experimentation. And related to this, we are committed to do research to measure the impact, so to contribute more to the evidence on this respect. And as I mentioned already, what we finally aim is to see how we can improve local policies and bring culture as an active agent for well-being in the city. And Cristina mentioned already, we have started a Creative Europe funded project, which is called Art and Wellbeing. You can see on the screen who are the partners on this project, and I'm happy that Professor Sacco is our research partner in this endeavor. This is a project where we are doing more or less the same activities that I've just described. We're doing artistic, experimental interventions. We are piloting cultural prescriptions in 3 cities, in Maribor, in Brussels, and in Cluj. And we also experiment with spaces that use art as means of having a break from the everyday noise and activity. In the framework of this project, this month we have started a Europe-wide survey on cultural consumption and how this is related to the perceived well-being. And I'm going to share with you just very few preliminary ideas from that are highlighted by this research. We are now in the analysis of the data, so we are going to be able in a few months to come with proper results. But another project that I want to mention here is a Horizon 2020 project that, again, we are partnering with a lot of academic institutions, and again having the support of Professor Luigi Sacco as a key expert, which actually aims to build an instrument for cities to be able to measure and then make better use of culture for their well-being. This is a project that just started, and now just a few ideas about our research. You see, we had over 1,400 respondents and a questionnaire that has been available in 8 languages. And just to say as key impression is that people engaged with art consumption more during the crisis. So it seems that when people are focused on well-being, then art has something to say. And we looked also at arts consumption and also at creative activities. So people really engaging, doing hands-on, doing themselves creative activities. So you see there is also an increase in people getting involved with something creative. And what they share with us is that they sing, they write. I think mostly people write, but they sing, they play a musical instrument. And it's very interesting for young people. They are much more interested in singing and music. The older generations, they have more varied interests. And just a quote from one of the persons. We wanted to see if people had a special connection with a specific work of art. And here someone shares the experience of an online performance that made her cry, breathe, relax, and feel in sync with herself. And we have a lot of evidence that is similar to this. And another short insight from this is, you see a series of affirmations about how art makes people feel, and you see definitely most of the people say that art makes them feel better. There are other ideas also that it helps them value life or experience beauty and awe, or get into a desired mood, be that active or blue. Now, just for the sake of our conversation, I was trying to think of some questions for cities and festivals, and I think it is important that we are considering the context in which we are working. So maybe we need to look first at what are the key challenges. Of course, there are some global challenges as the pandemic has been and continues to be in the next period, but also there are certain disease or maybe mental issues that are more prevalent in certain spaces, and I think it would be useful if we would focus our work towards these. Also on how we can make sure that culture becomes part of the local policies and local actions to support health and well-being. I think the northern countries are a good example in that sense. And it's also maybe interesting to see what are the skills that we need as cultural workers in order to address these sometimes more vulnerable groups and more delicate issues without causing more trouble. Because we know, I think, and Mr. Sacco has already mentioned, there's a lot of evidence on the positive impact of art and cultural consumption, but there are also evidences on how some experiences can be negative. So I think we should not simply consider that everything that we do will have a positive impact on people. And I think it's important for us to focus on what we can do together. I think there is a field where we have to look at joint action across Europe. And again, some possible action is for everyone in our festivals and in our cities to use maybe and share instruments to impacts, to measure the impact of our events, exactly in the sense that Luigi has already mentioned, not necessarily to bring more numbers to the discussions, but rather for us to understand better what works with our audiences and what doesn't. And make sure that we increase access to culture and as much as possible throughout the year, because we know that participating in culture is the key to success. And then for us, I think, as cultural organizations across Europe, it would be interesting to share a repository of projects that we can all use or invite because they have a special relevance in this area. Focus on public spaces, and I think this is very relevant for cities and festivals. And definitely collaborate with researchers and health professionals. And definitely we need to speak about the results of our work, that's for sure. And from our side, we are going to share the results of our study on cultural consumption and during the pandemic in a few weeks. This autumn, we are going to invite you most likely on an online culture and well-being forum, given the restrictions. And we are also inviting more people to join our think tank if you want to join our long-term reflection on these areas. And also, we are considering how to develop a network across Europe of organizations that are interested in this.
Thank you, Rarita. Thank you also for your questions, because now it is precisely the debate moment. So please, you are all welcome to intervene and to take the floor. Just give notice on Zoom, on Zoom chat, of course. I think that you have from Pierluigi Sacco's intervention, it's clear that we are in a moment of change of paradigm, or at least all is set for that change. But on one side, it also means that artists and cultural operators and festivals, in this case as well, need indeed also to change and need maybe to develop new skills. Pierluigi already talked about digital skills, most notably, of course, but surely also in times that we will be allowed also face-to-face other skills and other challenges. So I would ask you, Rarita, Pierluigi, also Bart, maybe for Bart a more specific question regarding the other side, which is the policymakers. What type of challenges, what type of skills are needed for the arts sector in order to be able to get into this agenda? Don't know if any of you want to take the floor. Pierluigi, Rarita.
Maybe Rarita, you want to go first?
Pierluigi, please go ahead.
Okay. No, so personally, I think that since so much of today's artistic work is so closely connected to issues that have to do, for example, with institutional critique, with human behaviors, with emotions, and so on, I think that for artists, understanding a little better what we know about this, for example, from the social sciences, I think that today's, I'm not absolutely let's say, an absolutist supporter of, for example, of neuroscience or social neuroscience in particular. But clearly, we have incredibly fascinating and insightful results from there. So for artists, for example, to build some more confidence with what is being found in these particular fields, I think it's hugely important because it could broaden significantly their capacity to grasp and also, again, to poetically address certain kinds of issues. At the same time, I think that there is also the space for some, let's say, new kinds of figures and profiles. For example, if we speak of the relationship between arts, culture on one side and health and well-being on the other side, there could be the possibility of developing new professional figures, for example, in the mediation between these two fields. For example, something like cultural nursing, for some specific profile that not necessarily is a field that I want to pursue as an artist, of course, but as a professional that bridges together two different worlds. This could become a really interesting topic. And I think personally that in the close future, there will be also universities that will start offering some educational tracks in this particular field. I see that there is something from the chat. Oh yes, Ben Wolseley is absolutely on the forefront on cultural innovation in this, and I really think that this is exactly the important dimension to address. And but by the way, if it is the central cultural value I'm aware of, I'm part of the board, so I know very well what they are doing in the particular capacity.
Okay, thank you. Rarita, do you want to add?
Well, I think that on one hand we need to be very open to work interdisciplinary. Just the input and the artistic intuition. I think if we want to come from the level of the experience of one project to something that can be translated at the policy level and can be transformed into measures, then I think we need to work together with researchers and as artists to be willing to listen and understand the difference between evidence and intuition in that sense. I don't think we should submit that at all, but I think we need to inform a bit more our tools as artists and producers from the side of the research, and then improve from one project to another. I don't think it's necessarily a rocket science, but I think we need to have that willingness to include, to be inclusive, and to listen to the others. And of course, I think it would be useful to have some maybe introductory or training programs for those willing to work consistently with certain practices.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Bart, on the side of the City Council, and the Cultural Department, what type of arguments or challenges as well do you face in terms of convincing your mayor that you should invest also in arts and culture when you want to put forward the health and well-being policy of the city? Bart, I think you are muted.
Yeah, okay. Now, you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, I think that what pops up in my mind is resilience. I think that city administration and the city council has to be resilient, that they cannot block everything too much in strict regulations and strict rules, that also in strategic plans you need some blank space, because what we see now in these last months is that things are developing very fast. What Luigi also talked about is this hybrid forms. So you need some blank space. You need this resilience to cover this and to play with it and to give it room and space to see how it develops. Because I think it's a very interesting moment. What we experience now is everything that is happening now. Will it really change, have an impact on culture, on disciplines? Will it reshape disciplines? Will new disciplines pop up? We don't know what will be the societal consequences of everything that we live through. So if you're not open to all this and open to, we can play with it and we can give it room and space to develop and see what happens. I always talk about, or always use the research and development. The term research and development. You need in culture this research and development, like you have it in a pharmaceutical context, where you research and maybe it becomes something, it develops into something new, something interesting, or it doesn't. But you need this resilience to play with it as a city council also. And that is something that we as a city administration, I think, need to every time again convince our policymakers from that they need to follow us in this sort of thinking also.
Okay. Thank you. There are some questions from Miguel. Miguel, as they are long, maybe you want to take the floor and unmute yourself and ask directly.
Hello. Well, I thought you would read the questions, but thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. And I take the opportunity also to thank Kathrin for the organization and to say hello to Rarita and also to Bart. And thank you for your very good and nice presentation. I have like two questions. One is for Rarita, is about the results of the study you presented. Well, you just presented the preliminary results, and I'm looking forward very much for the final results. But my question is, how do you think we can use it, and in which sense we can use the final results? Will be to get like more support for funding? Will be to open new ways of supporting culture from another, let's say, point of view? In this case, the health and well-being point of view. Which is your idea of how the culture and the festivals can use this result in the future to develop a new project? And just because I had the opportunity also to say in person, I did yesterday also another study that was for a different reason. It was about suicide and the COVID, no, and how people is like have a more tendency to commit suicide. And there was many questions on this survey, and one of them, a few of them were related with culture. So how people have reacted during the COVID also with culture, and maybe it will be interesting also to link the study you did with another results that have another purpose, another objective, but where culture is also a question, because we see that in other sectors, they are also questioning about how culture can have an impact, in this case, in something as important like can be commit suicide. And I have also another question for Bart, and is related with the presentation of Rarita and the presentation of Luigi. By the way, I didn't know him, but I liked very much his presentation. Bart, because you are representing a city, how do you see these results, the relating culture and well-being? How do you think that from the city point of view, you can implement these new aspects relating culture and well-being into the, for instance, future culture policy of the city and developing of the festivals?
Thank you, Miguel. If the speakers allow me, I will also give the floor now to Harm Christian Tolden from the city of Bergen, so that he can as well address the audience. Please, the floor is also yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the great presentations. I'm sorry for coming late, but I came at a good time. I understood, because you addressed some questions that are very dear to our hearts in the city of Bergen. I'm not a politician, but I'm the Director General for Culture, Diversity and Equality in the city of Bergen. And regarding the question of what do we need as let's say bureaucrats, or the bureaucrats very close to the politicians, is the evidence where we can show that if we use art and culture, for instance, like the great idea of Pier Luigi, the cultural nurses, that they can that will reduce the cost of care. That there are some actually, I'm talking now as a business person with a business background. If we can prove that if we do more of activities related to art and culture, we can later on reduce the costs that we spend on care, because we see it particularly in our country, and I presume that's fairly the same in other countries as well, that we are an aging population, and the costs increase so much that it will not be sustainable in the future. So we really need to be creative and find new ways of having a happy and healthy life for a long time. And of course, and I think the research that already presented, art and culture plays a really, really important part there. So, but we need to break it down into financial terms as well. I would suggest and hope for that we can work on. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As time flies also in Zoom meetings, I will allow our free speakers also to take the floor if they want to respond. Please, maybe Rarita, Luigi. Rarita, please.
Okay, I will try very quickly to answer to Miguel's question. On one hand, I think there are so many very good research studies that can be used for advocacy and informing new projects that we as cultural organizations can develop, either to increase awareness in audiences about the importance of mental health and well-being, but also to contribute to prevention or really treatment. I think our study as such was a good opportunity for us to see, in a time when a lot of the support for culture has been interrupted, what happens on the side of the audience. Do they stop using art because they have other urgencies or not? And actually the study, to this very first result, shows us that a lot of people found a very meaningful connection with arts and found it important in that time. I think this brings some extra arguments because we didn't have before the COVID crisis as a test bed. But I think there's a lot of results in other research that can help a lot in our work.
Oh, thank you. Bart, please.
Answering the question from Miguel also, I think that it is important that the city administration and policymakers are aware of all this and that they use the studies that Rarita is also referring to. But I think that they also have to call upon the cultural players to implement this and to make this happen. And what we do in Ghent on a very let's say well, small steps that we already take is that we have the contracts, the subvention contracts that we have with our cultural players. We focus also on this, on well-being, on inclusion, and so on and so on. And we sort of oblige them to take this into account. Another thing is, I think that it is not only culture that we're not standing alone, that it's that other departments in the city administration be involved, and I think of health, education, social affairs, and so on and so on. And then the last remark that I would like to make is going back to what Luigi said in the beginning, that we need to also take into account and take care of the balance between not instrumentalizing culture completely, but also having this, the reality of culture, the creation, the development of new things, and the sheer pleasure of making things without also always having to think about all the other elements, I think.
No, thank you, Luigi. First and last again.
Well, I think that in some sense the pandemic crisis was a sort of natural experiment, because how can you imagine to have so many people secluded at the same time and so many people trying to find instant strategies to preserve their mental health? And the fact that people could access culture and all kinds of cultural experiences as a way to do this has been in some sense demonstrated on a scale that would have been unimaginable by other means. So what is really interesting is that this has created more awareness now on what's the role of culture in the daily life of people. And it's also created new possibilities for people who were not previously involved, for example, in cultural experience in this particular way. So I think that this is really a big opportunity to build on. And as Bart was saying, I mean, this is really a wonderful opportunity for policy that requires, let's say, some free possibility of maneuvering, not just sticking to already existing programs, but profiting from the new opportunities that are being created to carve a new niche, let's say, for the social role of culture. And that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Whenever can we imagine to have an opportunity like this another way during our lives? It's impossible. So this is the time to act, and we have to be extremely determined and very lucid in finding the best ways to capitalize on this in terms of creating a bigger social momentum, in terms of not simply support for the arts and culture, but more generally of understanding. Because once people understand, we don't need to convince them anymore. I mean, that's the problem. We have to make them understand. For so many people still today, it's a mystery why culture is there, what can do for them, and why it's important to society. And this is where we have to work on now.
Thank you, Pierluigi. It's moment to sum up now and to pass on the floor to Simon Mundy. Please, Simon, and before, thank you to all the speakers and also to all the participants. I just got messages that more contributors would like to take the floor, but unfortunately we have to round up. Simon, please.
Yes, I've got as you can imagine, a great pile of notes, which I'll be putting into a proper report later. But Pierluigi started by talking about the danger of instrumentalization, but he also talked about the fact that WHO is recognizing culture as a transforming force, and that we now had an extraordinary opportunity in terms of not just culture, but in terms of climate change, diversity, health, etc., to really move the discussion forward, and that we weren't peripheral to this discussion, we were automatically central to it. By becoming more accountable and we also became more credible, and that we needed to integrate with the civil society and step out of our own comfort zone, and indeed our own audiences' comfort zones, because they were doing that already. You also talked about hybrid knowledge spaces, the idea where you mix the digital and the live, so that in fact they fed off each other rather than being separate or thought of as alternatives. Moving on, because I know I've got about 30 seconds to sum this up, in Rarita talked about the importance of the inner space, the art and well-being, a think tank to coordinate that, and the increase in arts participation during lockdown, and the fact that it engaged with people in a completely different way made them feel better. And yet it set up key challenges for the contemporary urban living. She also made the good point that not everything we do has a positive impact, which I think is quite good. It's always important to remember that the arts are there to disturb as much as to confirm. Hans Christian Tolden talked about the need to break the evidence down into financial proof. I always think proof, however, is a very difficult thing to present in culture. Proof is something that scientists like, but even then they know that proof is never quite proof. Bart talked about the need for resilience and the importance of blank spaces in plans, keeping them flexible, allowing that space for innovation, not to be swamped by the normal bureaucratic requirements. And finally, just also taking something that Bart said about involving other departments in the city administration, health, education, I would suggest also infrastructure and tourism. And finally, Pierluigi said that this crisis was a natural experiment. It demonstrated the way we adapt and innovate, and that once in a lifetime opportunity in many ways, but we have to be lucid and determined in creating understanding as well as social momentum. So there you are.
Thank you so much, Simon. Rarita, Pierluigi, and Bart, and of course, Cristina, thank you all for your contributions. I think 3 words that were mentioned: collaboration, experimentation, and an alternative culture are 3 words that are important for us as EFA to do these conversations, I think, to do conversations beyond the festival sector and amongst the festival sector itself, but to, in a way, try that conversation on various topics to have a meaning and ask questions from various points of view, which is civil society's point of view and the politics point of view. We had Zoom meetings with business partners to try to have different stakeholders around the table and address that question today of well-being from these different perspectives. And I think it's very, very important that we go on with that conversation we call Festival Cities conversations. Once more next Friday at the same time at 1 o'clock with Festival Cities from Adelaide, from Edinburgh, Montreal and others to discuss a similar topic, which is a little bit broader maybe even, which is festivals, contributions and collaborations with all kinds of industries, other industries in the city, including well-being or health part of it. So I invite you for that. But first of all, and last but not least, I would like to thank you once again. Thanks for joining, and let's keep up having these conversations, and all together, that's our challenge for the next 2 months in the summer break, to really draw useful conclusions from that, and also, as Rarita did on her last slides, always try to come to very concrete questions and suggestions on how we can move on from all these discussions to joint platforms and learning schemes from each other. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Pierluigi, Rarita, Bart, Cristina, Simon, everyone. Thanks, Christian, to stick to us.